Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rachel Sterling, and you are attending the December uh, rendition of our Tenant Landlord Law webinar series. It is the last session of our 2024 season, I guess. So welcome. Thank you all for coming. Today we're going to be talking about updates. They're coming up to the renter's credit next year. If you don't know what that is, then you are in for a big treat. You're going to learn lots of stuff today probably about that. So we'll be joined by folks from the Department of Revenue as well as Prepare and Prosper. We're going to go ahead and just give just a couple of probably about 30 more seconds for folks to join in with us before we get started. Okay. Okay. All right, I think we are at a go. So again, for those of you who may not have heard, my name is Rachel. I am a housing attorney here at Homeline, and we are going to be going through our last webinar of the 2024 year regarding this time updates to the renter's credits that are coming up in 2025. So just a couple housekeeping things. First off, if you don't know, Homeline, we're your hosts today, and we are a nonprofit that helps tenants across the state of Minnesota navigate what their rights are under Minnesota tenant landlord law. So we offer our services across the whole state. We are free and we give free limited legal advice, excuse me. We do that in 4 languages, English, Somali, Hmong, and Spanish, as well as through email. So this is our phone numbers here to our various lines, as well as the website to go to fill out our email form. That is not an email itself. That is just an email of website you can go to fill out a form to email to us. So upcoming webinars, we're going to be continuing these webinars on into 2025 as well. I'm plotting all of our sessions at this point, but for January, we're going to be having our policy director, Michael Dahl, and our policy attorney, Larry McDonough, come in to talk about what our legislative agenda is for the 2025 legislative session. All right, and then just for a couple of housekeeping things for today, the session is being recorded, as you probably heard when you were signing in. It will be available, the video will be available on Homeline's website in a few days once we get this all off the cloud and sorted out. We'll also have a PDF version of the slides on to accompany that so that if you need that information, you can access it there as well. We encourage questions, love questions, bring them on. We did get some pre-submitted questions, so thank you for those. But if you do have questions that come up during the session today, please ask them, but please, 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 please use the Q&A function that's going to be at, somewhere in your Zoom. There's probably near the bottom. You'll see a little thing that says Q&A. If you don't see it, you may have to click on the 3 dots are on the one side. I had to do that today. I'm not certain why that changed, but Zoom, that's all I gotta say. Um, so, but if you've got questions, please ask them, but please ask them through the Q&A function. I will be putting in a lot of links and such into the chat. And so any questions that are asked via the chat, I probably will miss. I will feel bad that I missed them later on, but I won't, we probably won't see them to ask them. So please put your questions in the Q&A. Thank you. All right, without further ado, I'm gonna turn it over to Jake. Uh, Jake is with the Minnesota Department of Revenue, and please share with us your great expertise and knowledge about this upcoming change. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks Homeline for inviting us to speak today. My name is Jake Fenice. I supervise a team of outreach coordinators and communications folks at the Department of Revenue. We had a couple speakers lined up today, but my colleague Jessica Delsig couldn't make it. Something came up for her, which means you get me. So I have a lot of great information to share with you all today. Before I get started, keep in mind, this is a lot of new stuff. We've been out educating folks on these changes, creating new web content for guidance, and building out even our own internal procedures to support our employees when you all call us or email us. So I've got about 20-ish minutes of a presentation content for you. And then, as Rachel said, happy to answer questions that come up. I'll try and keep an eye on the Q&A as we go, or maybe where there's some pauses in the presentation, I'll grab some of those questions and answer what I can. Go ahead and jump to the next slide, Rachel. Thank you. Quick disclaimer, anything we discuss today is for educational purposes. It's not tax advice from us, and it also doesn't supersede tax law. So here's a short agenda for today. We're going to talk about the renter's credit, as well as give some updates for property owners and managing agents. And here's a picture of Jessica, who will not be hearing from today, so move on. Thank you. Jumping right into the renter's credit, starting this upcoming tax filing season in 2025, eligible renters will now claim the new renter's credit on the Minnesota income tax return. So to claim this refundable renter's credit, renters must file, again, state income tax return form M1. So for most people, most renters that have claimed this refund in the past, this means that they're no longer going to be filing a separate property tax refund return. And they won't be getting that separate refund later in the year either. So the renter's credit will actually be a part of their income tax refund amount, or be applied to some amount they may owe on another income tax return, or applied to other debts that they might owe that revenue is trying to collect on. Go ahead and jump to the slide. So when filing your income tax return, your 2024 income tax return in 2025, renters are going to use this new schedule M1 rent to claim the renter's credits, along with a schedule we've had for a few years now, the schedule M1REF, which is the refundable credits schedule. And that's how they're going to receive their renter's credit or claim it this year. You should still include a copy of your certificate of rent paid, or CRP, that you would receive from your property owner or managing agent when you're filing. If electronic, just punching in the data is fine. If filing on paper, we want an actual copy of that certificate of rent paid. So let's kind of summarize with some reminders, some important call outs. So in 2025, renters are going to claim the renter's credit on their income tax return, form M1, not on their M1 PR like they're used to. And they'll still use the CRP to file for it. Your CRP should have something called an electronic certificate number, or ECN, to be valid. And if it doesn't, go back to your property owner or managing agent and ask for a new one, or contact the Department of Revenue for a rent paid affidavit. We'll come back to that rent paid affidavit in a sec. Another reminder, no separate refund. So we will not be sending separate checks in August and September for renter's credit. Instead, they will be combined with the income tax refund that you would receive earlier in the year when you file. One important point to note, right? 2023 returns and anything amending previous year returns will still be on the old form, old style, getting separate refunds. So just keep that in mind for the history prior to this change. Real quick, I want to mention before we jump into this letter, or a call out about the rent paid affidavit. So again, if you're not familiar, this is the form we issue when folks have issues getting correct CRP from their property owner. In the past, you could not call us to request that rent paid affidavit or RPA until March. And now we're making it a change. So beginning February 1st next year and all future years, you can call us to request that RPA. So we moved that up a month, mostly just to help streamline the filing process for folks. We don't want them waiting until the last month of the income tax filing season to be able to get this from us. We wanted them to be able to request right away when filing begins. So because this is such a significant change for so many people, we actually decided to send some letters out to folks notifying them about this change. So in addition to stuff like this with Homeline, going out and doing other outreach work or giving out, sort of news to the press. We're also sending individual letters, and we have about 45,000 of these queued up to get out between now and the beginning of January. So on the slide, you'll see our criteria for issuing those letters, mostly just focusing on folks who have never had to file an income tax return before. So if in the last 2 years you filed an M1 PR, but not an M1, you will likely receive this letter. So there's nothing you need to do with it. It's just informational. It's designed to help people work through this change and anticipate how they will be filing in a couple of months. Go ahead, jump forward. Real quick note about homeowners, they'll still file on the M1 PR like they have in the past. We removed a schedule, the M1 PR-AI for additional non-taxable income. Basically a schedule used to support that calculation. Kind of into the weeds here, but with the renter's credit moving off that form, we also moved the special refund calculation off to a new schedule. So we had all this extra room on the M1 PR form that we've never had in the past. So we essentially removed what was seldom used on the form and replaced it with something that's really common for a lot of people when filing. So pretty common sense change there that we made. And that does wrap up the renters portion of the presentation. So there's some contact info up there. We'll flash that too and probably have Rachel throw it in the chat at the end. But I would like to now move on and focus on some updates for property owners and managing agents, as well as kind of walk us through a timeline showing, what's been going on with this project over the last several years. So let's give Jessica a round of applause for her first portion of the just kidding. Okay, move on. There's me. Again, I supervise a team of outreach coordinators. So thanks for that. Go ahead, Rachel. All right, let's start with some basics for property owner and managing agent requirements. This stuff has not changed. If you own and rent property, or you pay somebody to manage your rental property, and that property was subject to property taxes, or you made tax payments in lieu of property taxes, you are required to create a certificate of rent paid and issue it to your tenants by January 31st of the year following those rental payments. Again, this has not changed. The form is then used by the renter to file and claim the Minnesota renter's credit on their income tax return. So let's talk more about who gets a CRP. You must provide a separate CRP to each adult renter who lived in the unit for the time they lived there. So let's go break that down a little bit more. If one or more adult renters, you want to skip back? Sorry, Rachel. Thank you. If one or more adult renters live in the same unit, that could also be an adult dependent or an adult child. These CRPs should show that each person paid an equal amount of rent, regardless of who actually paid you and what you actually received from them or from each renter. One change we did make a few years ago that's worth mentioning is no longer combining CRPs for married couples. We just heard a lot of feedback from property owners and tax preparers and even our own employees about this. Just a good example of taking in some feedback and making changes that make sense for people involved. So again, a quick reminder, all CRPs should be issued to individual adults separately. Let's get into some dates and also the penalties that are in statute that we can assess. So you must issue CRPs no later than January 31st, 2025 for rent paid in 2024. Also, a point about record retention, excuse me, you must keep a copy of all of your 2024 CRPs until February 2028, or 4 years from the date you issued them. So, because all of these things have statutory requirements in law, there's also penalties established for non-compliance. So, if you do not give CRPs to your renters, the Department of Revenue can assess a $100 penalty for each CRP that was not issued. Additionally, if you overstate the amount of rent constituting property taxes, we can also assess a $100 penalty or half of the overstatement, whatever is greater. And before we move on, I wanted to call out maybe a few frequently asked questions we get about these specific requirements. So, number one, you can give CRPs to renters electronically or as a hard copy. So even if we are creating these online, you can email them out, you can send them as PDFs, you can print them and mail them. All of those are fine. Number two, if a renter moved out before the end of the year, you can give them a CRP when they move out, or again, by the January 31st deadline. If you don't have a forwarding address, your requirement is fulfilled if you've sent the CRP to their last known address. Number three, you must issue a CRP for rent actually paid, even if the renter owes you back rent. Do not put more rent than you received on the CRP. All right. Again, lots of technical stuff. Thanks for bearing with me. So let's change gears a little bit before I wrap up. And I want to walk us through a timeline showing some significant milestones of this project and how far it dates back. So it starts in 2016. Revenue offered a free filing option for homeowners using our e-services system. It was only available to them because back then and still today, we're often asked why it wasn't available to renters. And one of the biggest reasons for that came down to our ability at the department to verify what's on that return from someone else, from a trusted source. So in this case, for the counties, we get information from them every year for how much property taxes were assessed on the home, who owns the property, how much they paid, so on. And that's what gave revenue what we needed to feel comfortable sort of opening the door to letting folks file for free using this system. On the renter side, though, the only relevant piece back in 2016 for this story is that property owners still required to submit CRPs to tenant. The same is true today. However, they were not required to submit copies of the CRPs to us, at least not yet. So some quick project goals here. We knew back in 2016 that providing this service to homeowners and not renters, not good. We were determined to find a solution to allow renters the same opportunities to file. And to get us there, we knew we needed to get CRP info from property owners. So let's move on to 2017 then. So during the 2017 legislative session, the Minnesota legislature passed a new law that allowed Revenue, our agency, to require owners and managing agents to send us copies of their CRPs. This was sort of like the first brick we needed to lay to start building the foundation to allow renters to use a similar system. We knew we wanted that additional verification, and this is how we were going to get it. So fast forward to 2019. During that time gap, we were just kind of like bringing our vision into reality. When we were finally ready, we launched this new feature in our e-services system that allowed only business customers to submit CRPs to us. And I highlighted business customers for a reason. As of 2019, individuals could not register and use our e-services system to manage anything, any tax filing thing. Only business customers who have a federal tax ID could actually register and submit CRPs to us. So again, at the time, someone with just a social security number or a individual taxpayer identification number or ITIN could not register and access this tool, this system. So Meanwhile, our project team kind of uncovered, what I'll call a technical issue in law that forced us to go back to the legislature to finalize one piece of the puzzle. And that brings us to 2021. So we solved this issue by advocating for yet another new law that allowed revenue to ask for a taxpayer ID during registration. This essentially gives us the authority to update our system and allow individuals to begin registering in e-services. And it meant that we could enhance our system to allow owners and agents across the state, not just those that had other businesses, to register and submit CRPs to us. Thinking like, I rent out my basement bedroom to my, whatever friend. Those are an example of somebody who could not have used the system before and can now. So let's jump to 2023. After another year of planning and project work, Revenue finally launched this new feature in e-services, allowing individuals to register and submit CRPs to us. It went live at the end of December 2023 and was in place for folks creating and submitting 2023 CRPs last year to us, or technically January 2024. And again, keep in mind, at this time, there was still no requirement for anybody to use e-services to create and submit CRPs. Now we're getting into recent history in 2024. So during this calendar year, Revenue began working on the transition to renters portion of the property tax refund to the income tax return, everything that we just talked about in the first half of the presentation. So again, 2023 will be the last year that renters will use the M1PR property tax refund form to file for their renter's credit. Again, one of the biggest reasons we're making this transition is based on some research that we did that show tens of thousands of people across the state have been missing out on this renter's credit for years, even though they file taxes every year. The thought behind this move from the M1PR to the M1 is that you're creating a more simplified filing process for renters to make all of their claims on one form, the income tax return. A final point here for 2024, again, using e-services to create CRPs was still optional. And that brings us to 2025. Next calendar year, the renter's portion of the property tax refund will be claimed on Form M1, Minnesota Individual Income Tax Form. In addition, all property owners and managing agents who own and rent property in Minnesota must issue CRPs to their tenants. I'm sorry, let me walk that back. All owners and agents who own and rent property in Minnesota who must issue CRPs must use e-services to submit those to us. So a quick summary of all those changes here for property owners and managing agents. Beginning in 2025, all CRPs must be generated in e-services. Number two, if you're required to provide a CRP, you also must be registered to use our e-services system. And three, there is an alternate process that exists outside of e-services to generate CRPs. However, we anticipate the exception list for this alternate process to be very small and ask that anybody seeking that alternate process call us and discuss it first. Before I close out, well, thank you for sitting through all of this. I'm sure it was a little dry at times, but obviously this is a year of some significant change for a lot of people involved. We're out here doing our best to communicate these changes in as many spaces as we can, just like today. And we invite all of you to share feedback with us along the way and ensure that these new tools and resources can be integrated into your processes, no matter if you rent a basement bedroom or if you manage 1,000 units of a high rise. I'll stop there.
Cool.
I didn't check for questions at all. I'm sorry.
You're fine. That's that's my job. That's why I'm here. Oh, I just got very dark. I'm sorry. Um, yeah, so there were no questions that were submitted with the Q&A, so that's fine. I also just wanted to point out to folks that I did put in the contact information in the chat. So, but is that individual.incometax@state.mn the appropriate place to like send questions and such if they come
You
up,
bet. Thanks
both
for doing that,
for
Michelle.
renters and for property owners?
Correct.
All right, fabulous. Well then, again, folks, if you do have questions, whether they're for Jake or for Willie coming up or for me, like if you have a question about tenant landlord law, like I'm here too. You can feel free to put them in. Um, ooh, all right. So, uh, Jake or Willie, someone is asking quick, can a person that does not have a definite legal status get a CRP?
Yep, good question. So, though, if that individual has a individual taxpayer identification number or ITIN to file their income tax returns with federal and state governments, then yes, they paid rent and meet all of the other requirements for the credit, then yes, they are eligible. Their immigration status or resident status of the United States does not matter. They need to be a Minnesota resident to qualify, though.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right. Well, then we're going to shuffle on to Willie, Greg with Prepare and Prosper. So thank you again, Jake. Willie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah. I do have a quick question for Jake before he
Oh,
runs away if he's not still there.
haha.
The
I'm here.
letters that are going out to people being sent to renters and such, are those going to be in English or in multiple languages?
They are all going to be in English.
Okay.
Ooh, and we're starting to get questions cropping in here. Um, all right, I'm just going to keep asking these, Willie, if that's all right with you.
Yep, that's fine.
All right. Karen is wondering for Section 8. We normally send the CRP to the head of household, not all the adults in the household. Can we still do that?
Yeah, generally, Karen, my advice is if they are an adult renter and they are not a dependent of anyone else in the home, then they should receive their own CRP with an equal portion of the rent paid. So, if there are other adults in the household, but they are not working, they are being claimed as dependents, perhaps, then that would be something you could issue just the one CRP to the head of the household.
All right. Great question. Michelle is wondering if an agency is a leaseholder and collects the rent from a client, so kind of a subletting situation, is the agency required to send the CRP to the client?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like we've gotten this in a million different versions, and I'll just refer back to the requirement. So ultimately, what it comes down to is whoever is responsible for or owns or manages that property, the responsibility is on them to create the CRP. So the better way to explain this might be I pay a agency to manage my properties. I am the owner of those properties. It is my requirement to ensure that those CRPs are created and submitted. Think of it similarly to I went to a tax accountant to do my business client returns. It's still on me. If I go and pay somebody to do that and they don't do it, it's still on me by law. So, something to think about there. It really does often fall back on the owner of the property for that CRP requirement, unless it is something like, the property is owned by a organization, an entity, if you will, then that goes back on the entity. So like a good example is like Common Bond Communities owns many rental properties throughout the state. They are the required party for creating those CRPs as the organization. So it's kind of, hopefully that helps. Follow up with me if you have specific questions, Michelle,
Yeah, so if the basic,
with HUD grants. Yeah.
yeah, I think some of a situation that I've seen that's kind of similar, or I think to what Michelle might be experiencing is where a um like a sober housing group. They don't own a property, but they are the ones who initially sign the lease, like a year lease or something like that with the property owner. And then the sober housing organization is the one who rents out the rooms essentially to individuals as they're coming up through the program. So the program pays the rent to the property owner,
Yeah.
but then also collects rent from the individuals. I know, right?
I want to still say, well, so my first question would be, are property taxes assessed on the property, right? So like generally, sometimes in those cases, those are owned and operated as tax exempt properties when they're providing a service like that. So that would be my first thing to check or maybe to follow up on is the property actually being assessed property taxes, because that's the whole point of the renter's credit, right? Is you're sort of passing that burden on to those tenants through their rent, or a percentage of their rent.
Okay.
I think I'm happy to chat with Michelle after this. Just maybe I'll throw my contact info in the chat, and maybe we can follow up with some of those
Yeah.
specifics if you're looking for more guidance.
Yeah, whatever you're comfortable with, Jake. Thank you. I know some of these what if situations are always a fun mental exercise to try and figure out what's going on. All right. Um, okay. So that's it for what's in the Q&A. So, Willie, are you prepared to start? Or do you have any other questions for Jake that we can keep him in the hot seat for another couple minutes just for fun?
No, I'm good to go here.
Okay.
I have Jake's contact information, so
I don't know. It's kind of fun to watch him go, for a second.
yeah, because this
All
always
right,
brings
Jake.
up some good ones.
All right. Well, we'll let you get on with it then. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, everybody. Again, my name is Willie Gregg. I am the Senior um, Tax and Financial Services Manager at Prepare and Prosper. We're going to talk a little bit about Prepare and Prosper, the services we provide, as well as the opportunity for filing taxes across the state and the different opportunities, free filing available. That is for most people who qualify for the renter's credit, often very likely qualify for free tax prep services through a various variety of volunteer locations, either VITA, volunteer income tax assistance, or through AARP sites. So Prepare and Prosper, like I said, is the largest VITA site in Minnesota, but we're one of just many that exist across the states. We are all IRS certified volunteers, go through a good amount of training. Some of that training does include renters and the updates to the renter's credit, homeowner, property tax refunds, etc. We have over 400 volunteers, but tax sites like us exist all over Minnesota, like I said. Our income requirements are based on individuals making under 40,000 and families under 70,000. And a family is a very loose term. So if there are two people on a tax return, that is a family from that standpoint. We can help with federal and state returns, with the property tax refunds for homeowners now, since that is the only thing that is separate at this point. We can do prior year returns. We can go back all the way to 2019 with the software we have. We do have a self-employment return option with a similar income guidelines to the individuals and families above. For self-employed people, it's restricted to people who are on filing a Schedule C, sole proprietors, independent contractors, more of the simple self-employment and not advanced business returns. And we do help with both applying for, renewing, and helping those individuals with an ITIN or individual taxpayer identification number. We actually have 2 certified acceptance agents who can help with verifying the documents that people have so that we can send that in. We don't have to send in the documents. We just send in a certificate saying that we authorized the situation to move forward. You can go ahead. So during tax season, we have sites across the metro area, a number in our main office is in St. Paul. We have other offices in St. Paul, various parts, a number in Minneapolis, Brooklyn Center, Bloomington, and a newer site that is Spanish speaking primarily over in South St. Paul. And we do have services year round where we have help during the summer and in the fall. And historically, those have been times when we help people who may be just filing the renter's credit, or that's their main purpose of coming to file a state return. And so the changes that Jake laid out mean that the delay doesn't impact those people anymore. So if someone who's just filing theirs can file at any point in time, but we have services all year round in case people need to get caught up and still work on those. Go ahead. A couple other options that we have and can provide to others is what we call our do-it-yourself tax prep, which is a link to an online software that is free of charge, no questions asked, no like um, no different things that are going to get upsold or cause you to pay more and more money along the way. If that qualification is under $84,000 of income, and if you're under that, you can do anything through that services, through that option. So that's on our website, and we can provide that. We also provide some support guidance, some webinars, some resources, some how-to guides on different ways of going about filing your taxes for those that want to take it on themselves. Like I said, we also have self-employment specific clinics where we have specific ways of going about things, and then the ITIN process that we have at our disposal. So you can go ahead. For our services specifically, appointments, we can start scheduling them January 15th, but we start our clinics on January 25th for Prepare and Prosper. Through us, you can schedule online or by phone at our website or at our main phone number. However, like I was saying, there is free tax prep sites across Minnesota, across the metro, across all different parts of Minnesota. And the Minnesota Revenue website has a good tool, a finder tool that can locate a site that is close to you or close to someone who's looking for these services. It also does have other free filing options on their website, so you can find out more information that way or find out. Right now, I believe if you looked at it, it would be very limited, but in the near future, I don't know if Jake has any advice as far as when this might be beefed up as far as the number of sites, probably into January and starting really in towards the end of January and into February is when we really would have all the sites that you're looking for that would be available across the state. So right now it might not have many in there because no one's really doing anything right now, but come a month from now, there's going to be a lot more sites listed and available there. Go ahead. So when we talk about the situation, the changes to the renter's credit and the changes that are happening. So Jake laid out a lot of the different logistical and some of the timeline changes. And the big thing is that it's a part of your state return. So you're going to get the refund shortly after filing. With that in mind, though, the thing about that is most want to emphasize here at this point in time is for renters to be prepared when you're going to file your taxes. So the key thing now is that you would really strongly advise to have all of your CRPs in place before you file your taxes, because it's just going to make the process so much easier, smoother, and efficient for you completing everything you need to complete with your tax filing process. I know in the past you may have been able to do that at another time. It's a separate filing process. Wherever you go to file your taxes, you can do that with somebody later, or you can put it into the software yourself at a later time. But just from here going forward, it's going to make your ability to file your taxes much more fluid, much more effective to have all of your CRPs ready to go when you're ready to file. If, however, you are missing one of your CRPs when you file, you will have to file an amended return on Form M1X to the state of Minnesota. Amended returns can be complicated to complete. State amendments must be mailed in. The paperwork themselves, you cannot electronically file them yet at this point. And so all those things result in complications to completing them, as well as long processing times for those to come through and to have an additional refund sent out to you. So if you do go ahead and file your taxes because you want to do it as quick and as right away when you're on the spot, realize that you're missing a CRP. that process is going to be a little more burdensome and a little more time involved in terms of long processing times. Go ahead to the next. So for property owners in that standpoint, understanding that providing timely and correct CRPs is now even more important for a full and complete tax filing for your tenants. So that this is something that it's not just an obligation, but it as actually is holding them back from completing this process potentially if it's not a timely and especially if it's not a correctly filed process. So again, I'm going to point to Minnesota Revenue website that has guidance, instructions, and through the filing of your CRPs, it has guidance on how to complete them accurately and completely so that you can follow some guidance, follow some instructions to make sure that you're doing it in the way that works for each individual tenant. One thing I want to point out is a bit of a snag and causes a lot of issues along the way is that the CRPs have a question, and they have in the past and likely will forward, about housing support, which is formerly known as GRH. So it is actually a specific program called housing support, Minnesota housing support. It does not encompass all types of housing support, such as Section 8 or other assistance you get from the county or other places. So make sure that if you're filling this out, you understand that someone is on this specific housing support or GRH, group residential housing program, before you answer yes to that question, because it can cause complications for the filing and actually the amount of refund that they qualify for by selecting that option. So you can go ahead to the next slide. So just to recap for renters throughout all this, again, the refund can be combined with your state refund. So you won't get a state and an M1PR or a renter's credit. They'll be combined together. It might be a larger refund. You get it at that point in time. The timeline is changing. It will be processed right after filing your state refund return and processed within the time that the state needs to or will process it. Should be coming shortly after filing. And a separate refund will not be sent in the summer. So for that reason, have all of your CRPs ready when you file, and all these changes do not apply to the homeowner property tax refund. So I think that's what I have to go over today, just kind of keeping it in that regard. So we're
Hey.
both
Yep. Sorry.
ready to roll for questions.
See, I'm sorry I didn't interrupt you there. I thought
Mhm.
you had completed your sentence. I
Yeah,
apologize.
no problem.
Um, I thank you so much really for all of that information. It's really helpful. Again, I just want to say that, tax credit stuff, help the reprime. Getting help with taxes is really nice, right? And so,
Mhm.
the fact that I have worked with Prepare and Prosper before in the past, and it's always been really helpful and honestly very making a stressful situation much easier. It was made my life a lot easier when I was trying to figure out how the heck to do taxes, the first time, out of college basically. And I was like, numbers help.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it is really great to have these services available. And so the I want to jump into I don't there are currently no questions in the Q&A right now. So if you have them, ask them, but I'm also going to jump into the questions that we got that were pre-submitted. So a lot of these have been covered. You guys all did a great, job of covering lots of those really great questions. So some of these I just will ask kind of for short recaps so that folks have that information. Again, repetition helps just cement it in the brain. So want to make sure that folks get what they need out of this. Um, all right. So first off, Shelly was just asking, how can I receive this tax credit? Just by filing your regular taxes, correct? At this point?
Exactly. You have
Yeah.
to file your state return.
Yep. Um, so Michelle, who I believe is a service provider, is asking, will the rent credit be applied to any taxes that may be owed? So if someone files their taxes and discovers that they actually owe money back, is this credit that they would get going to help reduce some of that?
Yeah, I'll grab that one. So, yep, it'll immediately offset, any kind of like income tax balance due that they may have. Any additional credits would be all factored in, and then they would either get a refund or a balance due. One other thing that I'll mention too is if they are getting a refund in total, but say they owe back tax debt on another year, they owe child support or parking tickets or any other kind of debt that might have been referred to revenue, before we issue that refund, we are required by law to pay off those debts if they are eligible for a recapture or refund recapture, we call it. So keep that in mind as well.
Ronald has a kind of a interesting question. I would like your input on, I guess. Ronald is a tenant, and they are wondering, is the changing of the rental rebate simpler to file? Is the law governing the change easier to understand?
I'll take a crack at that. And I'm from the government. I have like scripted wording on how to respond to this, right? So understand that before I jump in. But um, to be fair, right, for many folks who are used to filing both returns, they file their income tax return every year, they file their property tax return every single year. Yes, absolutely. It's all in one. There's now two forms. You're not waiting months and months later for another refund that you need to call and find out where it is. Again, that's like 80% of our filers are filing both returns and will now only need to file one. There are folks that will be caught up in this that were only ever filing the M1 PR before because they're only Social Security recipients or not working or otherwise do not have an income tax filing requirement. Those people, it's maybe not a simplified change. It's going from one thing to another. So that initial sort of change is going to be difficult and a transition for sure. And we acknowledge that. But yeah, I think generally the legislature made this change because of, a belief that this is simplifying for many folks out there.
Yeah, and I'll add on that one thing that wasn't covered in either Jake or my presentation was that they are changing the basis of how you calculate the credit from a variety of income, both taxable and non-taxable sources, to now essentially basing it on your federal income, what you report on your federal return is the start and the basis of the credit itself. So there were a lot of income sources that you were supposed to have been adding. A lot of them are state benefits or SSI, MFIP, MSA, GA. Those no longer need to be added to the renter's credit. And then even things like scholarship income or non-taxable scholarships for people who are in college were supposed to be added to the renter's credit are no longer necessary. And those are things that often people missed, and then they got a letter from Minnesota Revenue a couple, 2, 3 years later saying you owe some money back. And so because of not having as much complicated what goes into the credit, it has been simplified in that manner as well.
Really good point, Willie.
Fabulous. Okay. Thank you for tackling all that. A slightly loaded question. Um, the next, I'm going to combine three of them because they're basically asking the same thing. Jessica, Molly, and Catherine are all wondering, and you touched on this just a little bit, Jake, but basically folks like seniors on Social Security who have to file taxes to get their renter's credit, will there be a solo option? Or if you just don't file taxes in general, is this something you'll have to do now? You have to file taxes again, or um, you know, what do the tenants need to do when they don't normally have to file taxes?
Yep. So the easiest way to answer that is it depends on what you've been doing before, right? Like, so if you're used to going down to Prepare and Prosper and you've got your tax appointment, Willie and all of his colleagues are going to support you through that process, tell you what to bring, what to file, and all of that. In general, I think well, Willie, anything to add? Maybe you want to jump in?
Um, I mean, I think that a lot of the emphasis here is that a lot of things get covered by a tax software, both by Prepare and Prosper or by whoever is being, you know, providing the service or someone doing it themselves. But at Prepare and Prosper, we kind of all the things that Jake laid out as far as the new forms, this goes on this form and this goes on this form, that kind of happens automatically in terms of the filing process usually.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here. This might be a little bit too into the weeds, but it also depends on, again, so if you're filing your own taxes and you're used to getting software either online or on a store shelf, um, even by product, it may depend on whether or not you're able to actually just complete the renter's credit and send it straight to Minnesota. Other software may require you to fill out essentially the entire return, submit it electronically to the IRS, even though you don't have any taxable income or income tax liability. But just because the electronic filing platform is set up that way, where returns go to the IRS, they get verified, then they send them all down to the states. Again, it really just depends on where you're going to get your return filed. The bottom line is the renter's credit is on a form, and you'll either electronically file that form or send it in on paper. And depending on what software you use, it might feel a little bit different.
And also, the other thing I'll add is that people sometimes think that they're just filing the renter's credit, but they may have a purpose and a need to file a federal or a state refund, and there may be a good reason to. And you also need to include all of your income, all of your federally taxable income. So if you're on Social Security benefits, but you also have a retirement account, you need to include all of that. And so there may be a reason or a benefit to file not just the renter's credit, but additional federal or state forms. There may even be a refund coming back for that.
Mhm.
I'll quickly jump in and clarify too. I see a question from Cynthia in the Q&A. Can you still file a paper M1 PR if you are a renter? So for 2024 and future, you can file on paper, but you would use Form M1, the individual income tax return, not M1 PR.
Yeah, so, but uh, to clarify, like property management, property owners, landlords, they all need to do this electronically with very, very few exceptions. But renters still have the option of filing all their stuff by paper if they so desire. Um, I mean, man, it's a lot of little boxes to fill out.
I'll try to tackle the other question in chat here from Meg.
Oh, was there one? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I see. It was mostly related to group residential housing payments, and
Hmm.
unfortunately, this is not an easy answer. Most of the time, it depends on the individual tenant situation, how much of their rent is paid for by themselves with funds that they procure, whether through their employment or otherwise. If, however, all of their rent is covered through public programs, there is a chance that they would not be entitled to claim the renter's credit. So, best discuss those with folks like Willie at Prepare and Prosper or other tax preparation, either free tax sites or through a paid tax preparer. I will give a word to the wise for those filing on their own using software. This can be tricky. This can definitely get you a credit when you may not be entitled to, and then we come knocking a year later asking for the money back. So if you're not certain of eligibility for a particular tenant who has group residential housing or part of their rent is paid for by public benefits, you may want to study up on that before recommending they claim the credit.
There's actually question then that pops up for me. I know that we saw more of this in for 2020's and 2021's credits, but like rent help program was a federally and then a state subsidized emergency rental assistance program that would pay 3 to 6 months worth of rent sometimes for folks. And there was questions about how tenants were going to, if they could count that as rent paid or not. And I believe the answer was that if rent help was paying it, then that wasn't rent that they got to put towards their own CRP.
Willie, you wanna you wanna help me out with that? I mean, that was like
Uh,
generally speaking, right? Any kind of like cash assistance, a lot of the times our general rule of thumb is if the person, the renter in this case, had control of those funds, it is
yeah,
counted towards their income as well as their rent paid amount. If that renter had no control of the funds, meaning that rent was paid directly to their landlord or managing agent, they're not entitled to credit for that amount of rent paid and should not be reflected on their CRP. I saw another question come in chat. Again, this is like very common, that we get a lot of questions about how much rent we need to list on line one, showing total rent paid. And again, I can't answer onesie, twosie questions. A lot of it depends on scenario and situation. I would recommend looking at our guidance out there. What constitutes rent paid? What should be and should not be included in rent? We have robust resources that support landlords for making these decisions. And when in doubt, give us a call and share that with us. But definitely check out our instructions for landlords. Check out those lists on our website. Many questions come in about garage rent, pet rent, the security deposit, all of that stuff, all of those individual questions are answered on our website.
Awesome. All right, I'm just gonna pop that in there. Um, yeah, and for the website, now they're specifically around the renter's credit and CRPs and stuff. Those pages have been changing kind of throughout the year. Um, and I think Willie was wondering as well earlier about some of the things. When are they going to be updated specifically for like if you know when the free tax preparation sites kind of go live on the
Yep, I
website?
can I can try to answer both of those. So
Hmm.
the free tax prep site search should go live around mid-January. So like Willie mentioned, Revenue hosts sort of a one-stop shop on our website for anybody to go out and seek out free tax preparation services. You can do a zip code search or actually pull up an interactive map and see where near tax sites are near your home. So that again, January 15th, we wait for all of our tax sites across the state to finalize their hours of operation and all of that before we publish all of that. So you can expect that in about a month. As far as web content, Rachel, you're right. It's changing every day, it feels like. So we've been doing a lot to transition this content over on our web very intentionally, right? So y'all are still filing for 2023 renters credits on M1 PR forms. And so we did not want to change over all of our web guidance until this change really is starting to impact people, which isn't until now or in January of 2025. So there might be some references out on our website that still talk about 2023 and prior, as well as call outs for these changes and what the program looks like for 2024 and beyond. And I expect more changes as well. As we've been out doing work like this, we're getting a lot of questions. Obviously, we're developing like frequently asked question lists, looking at ways to publish those out for folks as well.
Mhm. Awesome. Thank you for all of that. All right, so that is it for questions in the Q and A and the chat. There were a couple of questions that were more geared towards kind of my area of expertise that I'm going to just talk about real quick while we're all here. Corinne is a tenant, and they were just wondering if you can be charged rent for picking up keys. Maybe. Depends on when your lease starts and when keys are usually when a tenant is considered to have possession. Once you have the keys, you're able to kind of access the property. And so at that point, then if you have access to the property, the right to possession of that property, then you probably are also liable for rent for that point. Um, and then contracts as a whole shouldn't be backdated. So a lease is just a contract. And so contracts should not be backdated. They should be effective from when they get signed and all of that fun stuff. And then Jan was wondering, searching for apartments. Wow, what a minefield it is, right? Trying to find an apartment out there in the world is not an easy task. So a lot of it, so at this point, finding, websites are great. Make sure that you um, get to actually talk to the property owner, or at the very least their representative, be able to see the actual unit that you're going to be renting, not just like a show unit. um, there's a couple of really housinglink.org is probably my favorite site to recommend for folks. I'll put that in the chat here quick. That is a really great website for finding apartments, especially for ones that accept certain subsidies like Section 8, or may be landlords who are willing to work with tenants who have less than perfect backgrounds, whether, credit history, criminal history, rental history, that sort of stuff. So housinglink.org is a really great resource for that. And again, I'll put that in the chat down here. And then lastly, we're wondering about apartment inspections. There is a new law that just went into effect this year. If you've been with us the last 2 years here on our webinar journeys, you will know that we have been saying that a lot over the last year and a half. There's a new rule about how landlords are supposed to offer inspections both at the beginning of a tenancy and at the end of a tenancy. And so that is something that they're supposed to offer to you. As a tenant, I highly recommend accepting them, taking them up on that offer, so that you can get a standard of what does the apartment look like when you move in, and then what does the apartment look like when you move out? Because what the landlord can essentially hold you liable for is any damages that are above and beyond normal wear and tear that you caused. And so, that's why it's nice to have a, kind of at the beginning, what is the meme? This is us then, this is us now, sort of, side by side picture take. That's what you ultimately want to have for when you're moving in and moving out of a rental unit. All right. I think I just got everything that was our pre-submitted questions that didn't involve taxes. Um, so it is 2:34 now. If anyone has any last minute questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A real quick. Otherwise, I want to say thank you so much to both Willie and Jake here for answering all of these questions. I certainly have been well out of my depth in all of this. So I really appreciate you all sharing your expertise and taking the time to work with us on these somewhat complicated issues. Not super duper complicated, hopefully less complicated now than they were, as we told Ronald. But again, thank you so much for joining us today. We will get this all up on our website, the recording and the PDF of the slides up on just a few days. Um, and then thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody, and we'll see you in January. Thank you, and bye-bye now.
Thank you.